Whatever it takes, we strive for a better tomorrow. With fair elections, justice, rule of law, universal rights for all, independent media, freedom from tyranny, achieving lasting peace, to raise a voice and have a real choice, to be heard. Around the world, even in the most difficult circumstances, we see time and again that people want democracy.
Democracia.
Democracia.
Ufulu.
Ordinary people are overcoming extraordinary odds, risking everything for human rights and freedom. This cause, the cause of our time, is why the National Endowment for Democracy exists. The National Endowment for Democracy was founded in 1983 with bipartisan congressional backing as an independent, non-governmental, non-profit grant-making foundation dedicated to strengthening democracy abroad. New ideas and calls for democracy support were taking hold, paving the way for an initiative to foster a global infrastructure of democracy, for people to freely determine their own destiny.
Freedom is not the sole prerogative of a lucky few, but the inalienable and universal right of all human beings.
NED holds a unique role as America's leading foundation for freedom. We respond to and support what citizens around the world are already championing for themselves.
You don't really know who you are until you're forced to fight for it.
Since our founding, we have stood alongside those who are on the forefront of democratic struggles everywhere. As a resource and hub for learning and intellectual exchange, NED shows up for those working for democracy. We stick around for the long term. As the challenges get tougher, we adapt, innovate, and work together in common cause to turn the tide on tyranny, to foster democratic renewal. This is the cause of our time.
I want to welcome everyone here to the National Endowment for Democracy today. I'm Damon Wilson, the President and CEO, and it's a real honor to have so many friends of democracy, so many friends of Guatemala, so many friends of the late Ambassador Francisco Villagrán. Thank you for being with us today. On behalf of the endowment, on behalf of Be Just, and on behalf of Ambassador Hugo Bateta from the Embassy of Guatemala, we want to welcome all of you who are here with us in the room and all of those that are joining online to honor the late Ambassador Francisco Villagrán. And I think there's no better way to honor the ambassador than by talking about Guatemala and its democracy with the people that are in this room today. I want to tell you how touched we are to be able to welcome his widow, who's here with us, Donna. It's a real honor to have you here. Thank you for joining us on what is a sad occasion, but one in which we're celebrating the contribution of your husband's life to Guatemala's democracy throughout his lifetime. But many of you in the room have had your own connection to Guatemala's, the Guatemalan people's aspirations for democracy. Many of you have been very close to the former ambassador, whether it's his academic endeavors, Arturo Valenzuela, as you well know, whether you were diplomatic partners, Ambassador McFarland. It's great to have you here. We're partners in common cause. He's someone who spent a lot of time at the endowment, felt, as Donna, as you said, felt that this could be home, a place for people who came with fellowships when they needed refuge, the Reagan Facel Fellows. And that's why Claudia, it's so wonderful to welcome Claudia Escobar back here as ambassador, someone who also followed in his footsteps as a Reagan Facel Fellow here at the endowment. And of course, Arturo Villagrán, having him not only as an uncle, but as a mentor. We were honored to be able to host the ambassador here at critical times at the endowment as a fellow, to not only help him think about the next steps of his contribution to Guatemala's democracy, but to help to enrich the environment here at the endowment and to keep our team, our staff, grounded in the work of those working on the front lines of democratic struggles by having him here with us. I had the honor as a relatively new president and CEO at the endowment. He had a longer relationship with the institution than I did, to meet him when he came here and accompanied then President-elect Arevalo. At a time when we kicked off the beginning of this year, it was a time and a year of elections when there was a lot of uncertainty over whether President Arevalo would be able to take office. And in part because of his advocacy, his voice, his determination of rallying the international community and the support of the Guatemalans. And so today it's a sad moment. It's a sad moment to honor his loss. But it's also a poignant moment to be gathered today to be talking about Guatemala's democracy, as Guatemala has stepped up, as President Arevalo has stepped up, to welcome 135 Nicaraguans who were unjustly detained as prisoners in a dictatorship in Nicaragua. And it says a lot about the state of Guatemala today, Guatemala's democracy, President Arevalo's leadership. I spoke with Ambassador Tobin Bradley this morning, and he said how much he saw the Guatemalans and President Arevalo step up in an important moment for democracies and Democrats to support each other. And I think it underscores our commitment, our need to be invested in this democratic experiment and to be all in a critical moment. The international support that Ambassador Villagrán helped rally, it was really only made possible first because of the Guatemalan people who stood up and, despite great odds, demanded change. Because of the grassroots support that so many around the world saw and an outpouring for democracy, a remarkable stance in particular taken by an indigenous population which defended those rights and that election. And the critical moment where we saw key business leaders also clearly opt to voice their support for democracy, to come together to help create an important moment. Now, as we've discussed, it's a complex, complicated time in Guatemala. It's almost an understatement to say. But Francisco Villagrán's political experience in domestic international relationships, those are missing at a critical moment. He was a value node in the support infrastructure. So I think that puts a lot of responsibility and obligation on many who are here, many of those who are watching, on how to step up to help the values that he cherished succeed in Guatemala. And so others who will be speaking today had a deeper, longer, more personal relationship with him. We'll talk about his legacy and his work and how he would be thinking about a way forward for Guatemala today. But I want to say here that we at the endowment and within the NED family with our core institutes, we believe the best way to honor the ambassador's legacy is to ensure that Guatemala remains not only a priority for the endowment, for the NED family, but a priority for the international community, because it is a place in a difficult region at a difficult time for democracy, where it is doing something bold, where democracy is winning, and it merits our support at a very difficult time. And this is an urgent, time-limited window of opportunity where we all need to be leaning in. And that's a little bit about what today is about, how to honor Ambassador Villagrán's legacy by doing that. And it stands in a way that's almost, as I said, poignant but jarring in contrast, as 135 Nicaraguans arrive in Guatemala, in contrast to what we see taking place in Nicaragua, the struggle we see right now in Venezuela. And so we need to be doing what we can to help the Guatemalan people get this right and to play our part in supporting them. And we have to work across political divides, certainly in Guatemala, here left-right political divides, and also jointly with private sector, business, organized labor, that have to be part of the solution. And in many respects, this is exactly what NED was created for, to reflect the pillars of organized political life in the United States, where we have differences, of course, but to bring together the left, the right, business, labor behind a common cause. So we're privileged to have you here, to welcome you here. We're privileged to have this opportunity to honor his legacy. And we're going to kick off the program by sharing a recorded greeting from President of Guatemala, Bernardo Arevalo himself. And after that, we will turn to the Ambassador of Guatemala, Ambassador Hugo Beteta. It's an honor to have you with us. But let's turn to the video to watch President Arevalo's message. Thank you.
Hace pocos meses, Francisco Villagrán dejó este mundo de manera dolorosamente sorpresiva. Dolorosa en primer lugar porque perdía a un amigo de décadas, y la partida de un amigo siempre deja un vacío imposible de llenar, pero paradójicamente repleto de nostalgia. Pero lamentable también para nuestra sociedad porque la partida de un ciudadano notable, un profesional distinguido, un funcionario brillante, implica que no podremos seguir contando con sus aportes y capacidades, que a lo largo de su vida tanto contribuyeron a nuestro país, y en este momento en particular a nuestro joven gobierno. Sin embargo, de alguna manera su partida no ha sido total. Cuando hombres como Francisco Villagrán de León fallecen, no desaparecen. En realidad nunca terminan de irse, en la medida en que dejan un legado tangible, vivo, que crece y se revaloriza con el tiempo. Francisco fue un gran diplomático, o mejor dicho, un miembro distinguido del servicio diplomático. Y enfatizo aquí la palabra servicio, en un entorno en donde las motivaciones egoístas tienen con demasiada frecuencia más peso en el desarrollo de las carreras individuales que el interés nacional. Francisco se entendió siempre a sí mismo como un servidor público, como alguien que estaba poniendo sus talentos, y vaya que los tenía, al servicio de una causa mayor, la causa de Guatemala, de su pueblo y su democracia. Francisco sirvió como viceministro de Relaciones Exteriores en el primer gobierno electo democráticamente después de décadas de dictaduras, y de ahí en adelante formó parte de esa nueva diplomacia de raigambre democrática que representó con un desempeño sin igual a nuestro país en los foros más importantes de la política mundial, especialmente en la Organización de Estados Americanos y en las sedes de Ginebra y Nueva York de la Organización de Naciones Unidas. En los albores de nuestra transición a la democracia, Francisco contribuyó efectivamente a que Guatemala avanzara hacia un régimen de libertad, contribuyendo a la gestión de apoyo internacional para sostener la naciente democracia guatemalteca y para apalancar los procesos de paz en una Centroamérica que se desangraba. Su esfuerzo contribuyó a la firma de acuerdos que definieron la vida de toda una generación en nuestra región, una vida en paz. Puedo decir, sin temor a equivocarme ni a exagerar, que el servicio de Francisco contribuyó de manera directa a los procesos de democratización y de pacificación que permitieron poner fin a décadas de desgarre sangriento en nuestro país. Y en consistencia con esa trayectoria, al momento de su partida, Francisco estaba entregado a la defensa en el espacio internacional de la institucionalidad democrática de Guatemala, movilizando la atención internacional en apoyo de la voluntad democrática del pueblo, asediada por las minorías corruptas que hoy son la principal amenaza a nuestra libertad y a nuestro desarrollo. Para mi gobierno, para nuestro partido, ha sido un privilegio contar con su experiencia diplomática, con su mente brillante, con su trabajo disciplinado, su compromiso democrático y su entrega desinteresada en la búsqueda del futuro que deseamos para Guatemala. Pero Francisco también fue un académico notable. A lo largo de su vida escribió numerosos informes y artículos sobre relaciones internacionales que contribuyeron de manera tangible a la comprensión de los retos y oportunidades que las relaciones internacionales presentan al desarrollo democrático de las naciones, y donde destaca su último volumen sobre la interpretación contemporánea del concepto de soberanía. Pero su generosidad lo llevó a compartir este enorme conocimiento y experiencia en la intersección entre derechos humanos, autodeterminación y soberanía con cientos de estudiantes en aulas universitarias de Guatemala y de los Estados Unidos, en la Facultad de Derecho de su alma mater, la Universidad Rafael Landívar, y en la Universidad George Washington, en la capital estadounidense. Francisco es entonces un ejemplo de coherencia. Su vida profesional, su servicio diplomático, su actividad política, fueron entregadas a la causa de la libertad, de los derechos humanos, de la vida en democracia. Dedicó su talento a apoyar en el ámbito de las relaciones internacionales, a darle forma a la Guatemala que deseamos. Una Guatemala donde las personas son respetadas plenamente en su dignidad, donde todas las voces son escuchadas, pero también una Guatemala que se hace un lugar de respeto y dignidad en el mundo entre los pueblos comprometidos con la democracia, la justicia y los derechos humanos. Francisco, mi querido amigo Paco, ha dejado huella. Durante su vida se dedicó a transformar su entorno y su trabajo, su esfuerzo no ha sido en vano. Ha dejado este mundo mejor de como estaba cuando llegó. No es mucha la gente de la que pueda decirse eso con toda honestidad, pero el legado de Paco está aquí y tiene vida propia, un ejemplo de compromiso, de coherencia y servicio.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, good afternoon. It is a privilege to stand before you today as we come together to honor the life and legacy of a remarkable man who dedicated his entire being to the service of Guatemala. Ambassador Francisco Villagrán, or as many of us used to call him, Paco, his unwavering dedication is a source of inspiration for all of us. Those who were fortunate enough to have worked with him over 5 decades as a career diplomat, a scholar, a writer, and a political activist as well, know firsthand the depth of his commitment and the scope of his influence. But before sharing a few words on Paco's unique journey as a diplomat and a public servant, I would like to express my thanks to Damon Wilson and, of course, the National Endowment for Democracy, one of Paco's homes, for guiding us here today, and also to Be Just for helping organize this tribute to Paco's life and legacy. I want to express our deepest gratitude to Ambassador Francisco Villagrán's family, starting with his wife, Donna, a dear friend, his son, Max, his nephew, Arturo, and many other friends who are here today. Your support and understanding allowed him to serve his country with immense dedication. Born in a time of change, Paco was more than a diplomat. He was a beacon of integrity, a tireless defender of justice, democracy, and the rule of law, and a seeker of peace. His impeccable ambition was nothing short of transformative. With every fiber of his being, he believed that Guatemala could be a democratic benchmark for the region, and he dedicated his life to ensuring that this was the case. As President Arevalo said in his message, throughout his career, Francisco served with high distinction in various bilateral and multilateral capacities, including Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in the first democratically elected government since 1966 under President Vinicio Cerezo. His diplomatic posts included serving Guatemala's ambassador to the United States of America, Canada, Germany, and Norway. He was the permanent representative to the United Nations both in New York and Geneva, and to the Organization of American States. His work focused on the defense of Guatemalan democracy and left an indelible mark on our nation's history. In a world often defined by its complexity and challenges, Paco represented Guatemala with honor on the international stage, navigating complex political landscapes with wisdom and grace. His work was fundamental during some of the most critical moments in Guatemala's history, particularly in the transition to democracy. His true character shone through in those moments, unwavering in the face of adversity, but always committed to fairness, responsibility, honesty, and caring. He believed a stable democracy can only be built on strong institutions and a firm commitment to a greater good. Through his tireless efforts and visionary leadership, Francisco fostered relationships and understanding that continue to resonate today. He formed deep and lasting friendships with Americans, significantly bringing our countries close together. Francisco last served as advisor and special envoy to the President Arevalo to President Arevalo from Guatemala. There, he had a crucial role in advising the President Arevalo on matters of state, including good governance, human rights, and democracy during very difficult times. On a personal note, I have to say that Paco generously coached me through the long conversations that we had. He learned that I was going to be the next ambassador, Guatemalan ambassador to the U.S. In fact, we sustained a long phone call the very last day of Paco. He knew that the path to a just and prosperous society is often long and arduous, but worth taking. He was our voice in Washington as we struggled for democracy throughout the precarious and dangerous months following our last election. As we gathered to pay tribute to Francisco, we're not merely reflecting on a career marked by extraordinary achievements, but also on the profound impact he had on Guatemala's international relations and on the lives of those he touched along the way. Paco's legacy goes beyond his professional achievements. He understood that authentic leadership is not about exercising power, but serving others. His vocation of service and his human qualities led him to earn the respect of political leaders and the affection of his subordinates and co-workers, for whom he became a friend, a counselor, a mentor, and in some cases, even a father figure. Many people have shared stories about Paco's solidarity and empathy in these last few weeks. As we reflect on his contributions, let us also remember the personal qualities that made Francisco exemplary. He was modest, compassionate, fair, thoughtful, and his gentle humor often masked a profound love for his country and fellow compatriots. He saw people for who they were, truly were, regardless of gender, race, and age. Through his example, we're reminded of the potential each of us has to make a difference, to bridge divides, and to contribute to a more gentle and peaceful world. Francisco's soft power is evident in this room. Look around as we are gathered here in unity, as he would have loved. Paco might no longer be with us, but his spirit certainly lives in each of us. In his final years and until the last day with us, Francisco remained focused on the future, working tirelessly to define a path forward for Guatemala. He envisioned a nation where democracy could flourish, the rule of law prevailed, and every citizen could live with dignity and freedom. We must carry forward this vision and honor his memory by striving for the Guatemala we all struggle for. Today, we commemorate a great diplomat and pay tribute to a beloved friend. Thank you for joining us in celebrating a remarkable person whose legacy will continue to inspire future generations. Te extrañamos, querido Paco.
Hello.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aimel Rios Wong. I'm Senior Manager for Latin America and the Caribbean here at the Endowment. Welcome to our panel honoring the life and legacy of the late Ambassador Francisco Villagrán. For those of you joining us online, welcome as well. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, let me share a few ground rules. A gentle reminder to please silence your phones so we give our panelists our uninterrupted attention. And additionally, you can follow us on X at NEDemocracy and also with the hashtag NetEvents. So the way we're going to proceed with this panel is I am going to ask each of them a round of questions, maybe two if time allows, and they will each have about 4 to 5 minutes to answer. We will then go to a reception right outside this hall, where everyone will have the opportunity to ask the panelists questions and interact and continue to reflect on the life and legacy of Ambassador Villagrán. So, I have the honor to present to you an excellent panel of speakers that knew Francisco intimately well. I will start, ladies first, with Ambassador Claudia Escobar, which is Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Guatemala to the Organization of American States. Arturo Villagrán, who is joining us online, and he is a legal scholar and nephew to the late Ambassador Villagrán. Welcome, Arturo. Ambassador Stephen McFarland, former U.S. Ambassador to Guatemala, and Dr. Arturo Valenzuela, Emeritus Professor of Government and Foreign Service at Georgetown University and former Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs. So to start us off, I'd like to start by asking you, Claudia, you met Francisco here in DC when you had to leave Guatemala to avoid political persecution. What was Francisco's role here in the diaspora during very challenging times for Guatemala's political life?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks to the National Endowment for Democracy and to Be Just for organizing this, and for everyone that is here for joining us remembering Francisco. As you said, I met Francisco when I came as a fellow to the National Endowment for Democracy. I am one of the first Guatemalans that had to leave Guatemala after serving in the judiciary. And I was surprised to find that there was a previous fellow here that was a Guatemalan. He was in the first cohort of fellows. And I remember when Sally told me about him and that I should meet with him. And she facilitated the meeting. And I felt a lot of respect for him. I had briefly met him before in Geneva when he was an ambassador, and I had to go there to do some administrative work. It was right after I had to denounce the head of the Congress and the vice president of the country, Roxana Valdetti. So I felt very nervous to be in the embassy, and I thought that they were going to be not very friendly with me. But I was surprised to find Francisco that really helped me to do the paperwork I needed to do in the embassy. And after that, when I met him here, we became friends. We became close friends, and he was a mentor and a friend for me. And after many discussions and many meetings and lunches, and after meeting his family, we thought that we could create an organization that will focus on promoting the rule of law, defending the judiciary, trying to strengthen the institutions in Guatemala. So that's how we created and we found Be Just together with Steve McFarland, who's here, and Nerea Paricio, and another friend, Diana Chacon. In 2020, during the pandemic, we created this organization that focuses on strengthening the institutions of the judiciary.
It sounds like Francisco served as a mentor for you in such a difficult moment.
Yeah, he was a mentor, and not only for me, but also for many other Guatemalans that came after me. I saw him how he was extremely supportive. Even when he didn't know the people before, he was always open to help when people were in need. So he was not in the position of being an ambassador anymore, but he was always an ambassador of Guatemala. He was really an honest public servant for our country.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Arturo, online, and ask, how was your uncle while you were growing up? How do you remember him, and how did his values help shape your personal and professional career path?
First of all, thanks for having me here for this special occasion. So it's nice to remember my uncle in such a great way. So answering to your question is that my relationship with my uncle, if you could see, was twofold, because first of all, in a good Villagrán fashion, like my granddad and his great-granddad and my dad, they never talked about their own experiences or what they did or how they helped. My uncle talked a lot about my granddad, the legacy they left, the values they helped, the struggle for democracy they faced. So it was an intimate connection in the way that I got to know, like, my uncle through my family values and how he described my granddad, my great-granddad, and all of their experiences, the challenges, and their good actions towards the country of Guatemala. So in this facet, I knew him as that family figure that actually just surrounded me with great stories about my family. And little by little, like, I got interested in what was democracy, international law, constitutionalism, and ethics, rule of law, and so forth. So this was an experience for me that molded my own criteria, that I found it exceptional, and it was just so informing for me. The second part that I saw is when I started to work, after I grew up and hearing all of these stories, is when I entered and I worked for a while at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there, I started hearing other people talking about him, his legacy, his actions. So in a way, I started to listen through friends and colleagues of his, the values he instilled when he was telling me the stories about my forefathers. So it was him in action that I could see it. And an occasion that I just admired and I love seeing is the paperwork and the reports and the actions he took directly for Guatemala ratifying the accession of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in 1987. So I could see his life in action in that sense. And that was truly informing that, it was get to know him in that way, but it's also a lovely way to reach out to the family values that just go through to the core. So that would be, I think, the most informing aspect of my life and in a little bit of his mentoring.
Thank you for sharing that. And speaking of seeing him in action, I'm going to turn over to you, Steve, because you served as U.S. ambassador to Guatemala as Francisco was the Guatemalan ambassador here in the United States. How was your interaction with him, and tell us about Francisco, the diplomat.
Okay. And I'd like to reiterate the great appreciation to National Endowment for Democracy and remarks by President Damon Wilson and also by Ambassador Bateta. Wonderful, eloquent speech by President Arevalo. So I met Paco in 2008, and by coincidence, he had started that year as Guatemala's ambassador to the United States, and I had started as U.S. ambassador to Guatemala. In fact, we both stayed around for 3 years, although he repeated the experience later on. And we would meet every couple of months. I didn't come up to Washington much, but he would go down to Guatemala, and we'd always meet, and we'd talk about things. And we found that our interest in democracy and rule of law, and at this time the CICIG, the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, the big anti-corruption and pro-transparency idea, was just kicking off, and it was both governments' policy to try to push it. So we had a professional interest in it, but we discovered we also had personal interest as well, that coincided perfectly with our government's positions. But we shared a personal interest in the furtherance of democracy and the rule of law, human rights, trying to avoid conflict. And that really stood out. At times when at some point, maybe after about a year or so, I had this kind of strange feeling when I would meet with Paco that he was actually, I mean, we were equals, but he was my older brother. He was only older by me by a couple of months. It was like he was, you know, a kind of senior older brother, but in a very, very nice, never overbearing way. And when he spoke, you know, I had this impression that he had somehow left behind me a way of interpreting things or figuring out what to do next that I might not have thought of otherwise. But he was always very subtle about doing it, and always polite, and perhaps the most humble person I think I have ever met. And that was, you know, to the extent you can still learn things as an ambassador. I learned from Paco. What struck me also was he had this family commitment, both in terms intergenerational. You know, his father had been a vice president who had resigned his high position over over concerns about human rights and democracy, and his grandfather had served in President Arevalo's father's administration. And just as important, his wife Donna was there, and she was, to talk about Paco without talking about Donna's influence on him is impossible. I saw it when I had the privilege earlier this year of staying with them in Guatemala as the inauguration was taking place and unfolding the last bit of drama. And you know, the back and forth at the dinner table between them was beautiful to watch, inspiring. And throughout all this, I was always impressed by Paco's ability to reach out to people, not just the people you agree with, but the people that you disagree with somewhat, up into and including the people who are your total adversaries. And it's, you know, it can be challenging for Americans, let alone foreigners in Washington, to have that kind of outreach that he had to both parties on Capitol Hill, and consistently to administrations of both parties. He was truly outstanding in his diplomatic talents. And well, you know, that was how I got to know him as an ambassador. And then when we each retired, and then particularly in this last year of apprehension, of excitement, of fear, of joy in the way this process has wound up, you know, we continued to work together and to get to know each other better.
Thank you. Certainly, his humbleness and his soft demeanor was something that you could tell from the first minute you would interact with Francisco. Now, to our second Arturo in the panel, you interacted with Francisco on several occasions throughout both of your careers. How were those interactions, and how did his values and his commitment to Guatemalan democracy and democracy in general sort of came about?
Well, look, I'm also extremely honored to be able to participate in this event. It just so happens that I did see Paco not too long ago when WOLA was having its event, and we wound up at the same table, and we were able to share. Claudia was at that table as well. with my wife, Katie, who's here, who works for NDI. And, you know, when he heard that NDI was going to go down to Guatemala, the first thing he said was, "Oh, count on me, you know. I can arrange to help maybe have you stay in some nice place." You know, he was very gracious about that. And it just reminded me of the long, long, long history that I had with Paco that goes way back to the time when I arrived first in Washington in the year 1987. In the 1987, I came from Duke University, where I've been on the faculty for 19 years, working on democracy issues, which is my field as an academic. And, you know, lo and behold, I wound up having conversations with the then ambassador to the Organization of American States, who was making a real effort to try to push the Organization of American States at that particular time to try to take seriously the promotion of democracy and support for democracy and that kind of thing. And I found out also that he was a Georgetown grad, you know, before that. And so we began to share things. And as an academic, I was really impressed at how really knowledgeable he was about all these things. He was also somebody who took seriously reading books and being really serious about his own intellectual pursuits. So that was really the first encounter with him, and I really appreciated that. The OAS had to take off at that particular point, and it did, to try to you know, play a much more important role in these efforts. It just so happens that I was wondering, well, you know, will I be able to stay in touch with some of these people? Well, why not? You know, I'm an academic. I'll continue talking to people like Paco and others. But unbeknownst to me, I wound up in the U.S. government, thanks to, in fact, Brian Atwood, who'd been, ironically, the head of NDI. And I coincided with NDI when Pinochet lost the plebiscite in Chile in 1988, and I was head of one observation project, and he was heading the other one up. And when the Clinton administration was elected, you know, he called me on the phone saying, "Look, I'm going to be the head of USAID, and I would very much like you to give me some advice, you know, on democracy sorts of issues. Would you do that?" And I said, "I'd be happy to do that." But then I did not realize, and he did not realize, that my CV had to go to the White House personnel office then, and White House personnel said, "We don't want him, you know, doing anything with the USAID part-time or just pro bono. We want him to go to the State Department, you know." And, you know, 3 administrations before, you know, it's been a long time since, so they didn't really. And I said, "I don't want to go to the State Department." But I called White House personnel. It was what they asked me to do. White House personnel said, "You've got to go see Ambassador Watson, who's going to be the ambassador." You know, and long story to make short, I wound up being the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Mexico when we were doing NAFTA. And Paco was in Canada as the ambassador, and occasionally he would show up here, and because NAFTA was, you know, the beginning of effectively of what was happening in the Northern Hemisphere, right here with the 3 countries, that became a way in which we could. And I went into my emails the other day, and what are 260,000 emails or something like that, and I typed Paco in, and he's all over the place. So, you know, he came in. In fact, not only as ambassador for Canada, I talked a little bit on that when he, you know, I didn't realize that I'd be going into the NSC afterwards. I went to the National Security Council as a senior advisor, and this is about the time that he came back to the National Endowment for Democracy. And so we also had a lot of things to share and to talk about. And again, I was amazed and appreciated his commitment to democracy, rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. So I didn't realize the foundation that he was involved in, but I'm not at all surprised that he did create the foundation. So, you know, it's part of his wonderful legacy. And if I might just go on a little bit further, because through those serendipitous things of life,
For one more minute.
One more minute. For those serendipitous things of life, I wind up as the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, you know, in the Obama administration. You know, Senator DeMint, however, held up my, you know, my confirmation because of the Honduran crisis. And guess who I turned to for help in trying to figure out how we would overcome the Honduran crisis and get Honduras back? You know, I actually called Paco and said, look, what recommendations would you have? What could we do?
What made you think about calling Paco?
What made me think about calling Paco was that I needed to have we needed to work out some folks who would actually help begin the process of getting Honduras back in. And guess who was, spearheading that? In some ways, it was Oscar Arias in Costa Rica. But then Paco said Alvaro Colom could help as well. And Alvaro Colom helped as well. And then, I got in touch with Leonel Fernandez, and Leonel Fernandez helped out as well. And we were able to move forward that whole process and, in fact, wind up getting actually Honduras back into the... So at any rate, that's just another example of the kind of time that I would just turn to him to have these sorts of conversations. That continued even after I left government and was involved in Covington and Burley, the law firm, which represented Millicom, But this is at a time when, CC was in trouble. And we were trying to, at the same time, support CC. So, and Paco is all over all of these things. And so I'm greatly appreciative for this honor that you've given me to be able to sort of, again, thank and express the appreciation that I had for a great friend who was an academic and who we, like me, through those serendipitous things of life, wound up in foreign service and in the service of our countries.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, I promise you, we will invite Dr. Valenzuela for an event just to talk about his lifelong career and stories in Latin America and democracy. But I want to shift gears now to sort of tie Paco's legacy to current events in Guatemala. And I want to ask you, Claudia, who you're serving as representative of Guatemala to the OAS, a post that Paco also had throughout his career. And the OAS has played an important role in securing the successful transfer of power in Guatemala to President Bernardo Arévalo. What role do you see for the international community, for the OAS, to play to continue advancing democratic gains in Guatemala?
Well, I think that there is a lot to do to defend democracy in the region, but we saw, how Ambassador Francisco Villagrán really set us a path that democracy can prevail even in very complex contexts like in Guatemala. And I think that that's something that we have to pay attention, how he was able to build bridges between different actors that can understand what is the advantage of living in a democracy. And I think he understood how Guatemala was a small country and also an incipient democracy, but that could be a big player in international and regional organizations. And I think that today is a good example to prove how Guatemala can be key, helping, for example, Nicaragua, getting all these political prisoners out of there and helping to build bridges between even nations that we think are beyond the possibility of recovering democracy. I think that the Organization of American States can play a key role, as it did in Guatemala before, during the election. I think it was the role of Paco during the transition that helped us move forward. And we're seeing right now the government of Arévalo facing some challenges, but also the Organization of American States is involved in an effort to oversight the election of judges. And that's an initiative that he promoted, and he came to the US early in March to ask the Organization of American States to set this effort to oversight the election of judges and to make sure that during the election, all the international standards for the independence of the judiciary are met. And I think that Paco was also a great example for many of us to follow on how democracy, on how diplomacy can be key to safeguard democracy.
And along the same lines, Steve, the United States has also played a crucial role in securing these democratic gains. In your view, what else do you think the United States could continue to do to count on Guatemala as an ally and to advance these democratic opening that, that this administration represents?
Well, thank you. I'd start by going back to the idea of the creation of the National Endowment for Democracy. I was a young diplomat when it happened, and
Thank you.
And it was this idea that America's strength resided not just in military might or economic power, but even more importantly, the value of ideas, particularly democracy. And because of that, I think it's crucial for a variety of reasons, but fundamentally because of this battle between authoritarian and democratic rule worldwide, that the United States focus on the challenge that exists in Guatemala. And I think what the United States ought to be doing is building on its earlier, I would say, very well executed actions, and including sanctions, is to do more sanctions, do more targeted sanctions against individuals, against maybe groups or companies, not against the entire country. And do it rather than wait for things to get even worse, because I think things could get even worse. I'm more of the gloomy people who think that the Pact of the Corrupt are going to try to overthrow the government in the next 18 months and send as many of its high-ranking officials into jail or exile as they can. They're driven by fear and revenge, as well as ambition and greed. But the fear and the revenge makes them particularly dangerous. Now, Paco in this would see not just danger, but opportunity. And that, I think, goes to one of the things that in his funeral mass in May, Cardinal Ramazzini said about Paco, was that he was a witness to hope. Era un testigo de la esperanza. And that more people had to be that, to be witnesses to hope. And I think Paco would interpret that witness as not just observing and reflecting, but also acting. He would say, this is what we should do. And that's, I think, what the United States has to do. The United States has, as do Guatemalans as well, have a responsibility and a duty to try to make sure that this opportunity for a stable democracy is protected and nurtured and not ignored and defeated.
That's beautiful. Dr. Valenzuela, as a scholar of democracy, we're witnessing a live experiment of perhaps reversal to democratic backsliding. Did you ever had the opportunity to discuss this with Francisco in the past year? And what was that discussion like? What were his thoughts? And if not, what are your thoughts as an academic of this opportunity, this political opportunity, and how could we keep moving it forward?
Well, look, we face some of these same problems across the world, including in this country. And I guess the one thing to say is to underscore the fact that democracy also requires the rule of law. The rule of law and democracy go together. You can't have democracy without the rule of law, and that means working. And my field now has been, as a constitutional scholar, I've been working on things. What do you do in order to try to fix, the systems of government that we have, and I've been working on this for a long, long time. Are parliamentary forms of government better than sort of presidential forms of government, semi-presidential forms of government? What do they do? Does it make sense to have a Senate of the United States where the majority represents only 13% of the population in the country? Of course not, So these things are really important things. So rule of law and democracy go together. And I think that's, but let me add one third factor, and that is that we are also, and Paco was very much involved in this, dependent on international institutions. So we need to preserve, strengthen international institutions that in fact, have as their fundamental duty, not only to create prosperity and so on and so forth, which many of them do, but also to pay attention to the fact that globally we need, a commitment to democracy and the rule of law.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to conclude with Arturo online. Arturo, you are currently in Guatemala. If you could share with us, what do you think is your uncle's greatest legacy? And how could we all, as a community, continue to usher that legacy into Guatemala's future? And end to end, I'll ask you, because ultimately this is a celebration of Francisco's life. If you could share with us your fondest memory of your uncle.
Thanks. So it's quite a bit. So I would start with the first question about the Guatemala situation, what legacy? And I think the greatest legacy he could say is it's the capacity of one person to make a sufficient synergy in the precise time and the precise moment to safeguard democracy. Guatemala, I would say, since last year, since we saw the transition process, lives in a situation of what is called abusive constitutionalism and abusive judicial review, which simply means the use of liberal institutions, terms, actors, in a manner that is detrimental to governance. So you saw the acting of the Constitutional Court, the Criminal Attorney's Office, Ministerio Público, other judges, and the reaction that it's behind, which is another topic that we can discuss entirely, which is the need for structural reform, well thought, contextual, historical, sensitive, because of the judicial appointment system that has all been hijacked, and more the Congress that's also seeing a new wave of actors acting with them, and an executive that hasn't been seen like in a way that it's being pressured that hasn't been before through this abusive role. So what I want to say is the synergy of one person can have at the international level, transnational with other countries, OAS, regional, transnational with the other countries, national with the authorities, and local with indigenous groups, in a way that actually that synergy in one precise moment of time can achieve a strategic victory. And that was keeping Arevalo and safeguarding the democratic elections. So all of these, what you would, because like I hear rule of law, so you imagine judges and executive officials. What happens when the rule of law is actually affected in a manner that it's not responsive to the population? It's a rule of laws or other kind of more primitive type of governance. But it's these unforeseen actors that can make one actually the moment that makes the thinking of accountability. What happens after the elections? How to keep accountability of them? how to make them, it's either informal or formal ways, or formal matters, techniques and everything, through social pressure, protest, sanctions. But it's all through this now informal actors that makes accountability a transnational and international exercise and norm, to think accountability, democratic accountability, not as a local situation, but actually one that is embedded into multilateralism and also affects other spheres, not just leaving it at the OAS, but also at the economic sphere, which is also ignored and has impact in Guatemala. So all of this making it, but at the end, as I might say, it's the impact that my uncle had in the middle of that precise little moment that you can make with a group of people, grow and make your voice stronger, grow, and just be there and do the right thing at the right moment where you can attain those small but precious victories for democracy. So fondest times, answering to your second question, and I would say, what would have been the fondest times with my uncle? And I'll be true and honest. It also involves my tia Donna. The moments I treasure the most, and I will say, it's actually when I went to visit them, stayed with them in Washington, D.C. when I was younger, and now more these last few years, is being in front of the tele, watching the news together, and also seeing the political debate of the U.S. and other places, watching Farid Kazaria and others, just enjoying with them watching those, the debates afterwards, and just feel a pure feeling of family. So I will conclude with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Arturo. And ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude, allow me 2 extra minutes of your time, because we received a surprise right as we were entering the room to start the panel from a gentleman who met Francisco in Berlin, and when he learned about this event, flew all the way from Kampala, Uganda, with a portrait of Francisco that he wants to donate to you, Donna, and to the family. He's here in the audience with us. His name is Emma Kiguli, and he has brought a statement to share with us, where he mentioned that he had the privilege of meeting Ambassador Villagrán in Germany, where I was deeply touched by his humanity and compassion. His tireless dedication to promoting democracy left a lasting impact on countless lives. I am forever grateful for the support and kindness he showed many during his time around the world. I would like to gift this portrait of Ambassador Villagrán to his family in honor of his legacy and the love he shared with so many. May his humanity and heart continue to inspire and flow forever. This is just another testament to the greatness of Francisco and his long-lasting legacy in the world. Thank you very much, and please let's give another round of applause to our excellent panelists. Thank you. Thanks to everyone that joined us online, and for those of you here in person, please join us to a small reception right outside and to admire the portrait that we have. Thank you very much.